Russia has hit back against the UK in the escalating dispute about the poisoning of a former double agent. The British ambassador was called into the foreign ministry in Moscow and given a list of measures that Moscow intends to take in retaliation to British actions against Russia, which London holds responsible for the attack. Steve Rosenberg reports now from Moscow.
He'd been expecting the telephone call, and today it came. Britain's ambassador was summoned to the Russian Foreign Ministry. And in the skyscraper that Joseph Stalin built as a symbol of a superpower, the ambassador was told how Moscow would retaliate for UK sanctions. A note of defiance when he left.
We will always do what is necessary to defend ourselves, our allies and our values against an attack of this sort, which is an attack not only on the United Kingdom, but upon the international rules-based system on which all countries including Russia, depend for their safety and security. Thank you.
The ambassador headed into work to tell embassy staff about the Russian sanctions. Moscow says they're a response to British provocation. Russia has expelled 23 British diplomats. The UK had expelled 23 Russians over the nerve agent attack in Salisbury. The authorities here are shutting down the British consulate in St Petersburg, and the British Council, which promotes UK culture abroad, will now be forced to end all activity in Russia. Moscow says the language coming out of London was a factor in deciding what sanctions to announce.
The British Prime Minister insults us and threatens us. Her Foreign and Defence Secretaries insult us. They talk to Russia as if they're drunk in a pub. So what the UK got from us today is the result of this loutishness and their groundless accusations.
Not so, said Theresa May.
Russia's response doesn't change the facts of the matter. The attempted assassination of 2 people on British soil, for which there is no alternative conclusion other than that the Russian state was culpable.
Relations between Moscow and London haven't been this fractured since the Cold War. The expulsion of 23 British diplomats, that was expected. That is traditional tit for tat. But the shutting down of a consulate and the activities of the British Council, that feels like a challenge to the British government. And the Russians have said that if Britain responds with more measures against Moscow, then Russia will respond with more sanctions against the UK. The danger now is a spiral of confrontation. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.
Well, the BBC's diplomatic correspondent, James Robbins, says the UK Prime Minister faces a tricky choice when deciding what to do next.
The dilemma is, do they interpret the expulsion of 23 Britons from Russia as a simple tit-for-tat parity, or do they think the Russians have gone too far by adding the closure of the consulate in St Petersburg and perhaps actually more significantly the complete closure of British Council operations in Russia? That's significant because it's the way in which Britain tries to export its values as well as the English language into Russia. It has a huge reach. It reaches a lot of young Russians, teenagers and young adults, and it's seen as a way of appealing to the post-Putin generation, trying to export to them values that they may miss at home. So losing the council is a major blow. How will Britain respond to that?
James Robbins there. Well, earlier I spoke to James Scher, an Associate Fellow for the Russia and Eurasia Programme at the International Policy Institute, Chatham House. And I asked him what further options were open to the British Prime Minister, Theresa May.
I think the key steps are the ones she's already outlined. What really matters now is the extent to which we will give practical effect to steps already outlined to increase security, increase the coherence and cohesiveness of our effort, primarily with regard to our domestic security, including protecting those people, including Russian citizens who are lawfully resident here, and other domains as well, which must include financial security and the privileges that dubious Russian entities have enjoyed so far in making use of all of the privileges and services of the City of London and the openness of the London property market. The Kremlin is still waiting to see whether we actually mean it. And this is the serious story, not the tit for tat and the exchanges that are taking place publicly.
Do you think the British government then have been hesitant to fully implement laws and legislation that they could have done over the last few years?
Over the past few years, definitely, and this is part of the problem. For many reasons, the Russians have seen the UK as relatively weak, and we unintentionally have reinforced this in a number of ways, not least of all by failing to vigorously pursue a whole raft of unexplained, macabre murders of Russian citizens in this country. The Home Secretary now says that all of this is going to be investigated. Well, good. Will this also apply to the financial sector, which is vital for a country like Russia, whose system, the system that Putin has constructed, is based on a merger of money and power at the very highest levels. And a lot of this money comes from very dubious sources and serves extremely dubious purposes. So we have laws on the table and mechanisms in place that can address this. And the Prime Minister has also said, quite rightly, we will be looking at those to see where they need to be stiffened and consolidated.